As always, I thank everyone who have always been praying for me that I could do this ministry. Lily's mom was sick this morning, so that's why she and along with Lini, they stayed home. They couldn't be here this morning. Um, to before I begin today's word ministry, I just want to um, bring to you to share one of the posts that I saw on Facebook the other day. So we know in all these days everything revolves around the pandemic that we are facing with. And one of the posts that I saw sounded very interesting to me. It is a picture of somebody going to the library and he's searching for books. So the librarian, he's telling that person, okay, you may see that we have moved around all these books at this time. So you will see these traveling books. We have moved it to the fantasy section, and this political books have been moved to the sci-fi section, and the epidemiology books have been moved to the self-help. So we all know what that means in regards to this pandemic. The traveling books have been moved to the fantasy section. All these things that we have in the past that we have taken for granted, and we have been doing it and enjoying it without even thinking that it was a privilege or it was a blessing, have all of a sudden, we are now longing to do it, because we never thought all those things that we have always enjoyed um, was always a privilege. We never thought with all these things that we have been enjoying, we never thought that will be taken away, or we'll be longing for all those things. And traveling is one of them. When I was in connection with my preparing a message, when I was reading Psalms 137, that in connection with my message, which we all know, uh, it was in connection with the exile. It says Psalms 31 and verse 1. It says, "By the rivers of Babylon we sat down and wept." I was thinking about our situation. Many of us are in that same situation, thinking about wanting to go to India, but now we can't. So that's the way the world has been. The things that we have always wanted to do, we can no longer do it. But even though when I spoke about Babylon, even though I said that in a lighter note, we all know that it was a very painful experience for the Jews. They have never been in. It's real painful in the sense, even though not physically, though some of the people were killed, but more than the physical part of it, it was the emotionally. They really went through a very hard time in their lives. They learned it through a very hard way about the consequences of not following the Lord's commandment, especially in regards to the idol worship. But even though they were in a situation where they have lost their homes, they do not have a place to worship. So it was a very painful experience for them. But at the same time, they are God's people, and God did not punish them as a surprise. It was not suddenly that God decided that that they have to go through all that. Through numerous prophets, through numerous prophecies that we know, God had warned them again and again, time and again, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. But they never humbled their heart. They never want to hear to the Lord's servant, to the prophet. They never humbled. They never returned to God, even though God numerous times. God had warned them. You are going to go through this. It's coming, but they never cared for it. So I want to plan to spend some time from the book of Daniel, but as an introduction to it of about what I said, let me read a few verses from the book of Second Chronicles, chapter 36, verses 17 through 21, before I come back to the book of Daniel. So Second Chronicles, chapter 36, verses, well, I'll read from 15 onwards. And the Lord God of their fathers sent warning to them by his messengers, rising up early and sending them, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they mocked the messengers of God, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets, until the wrath of Lord arose against his people, till there was no remedy. Therefore he brought against them the king of the Chaldeans, who killed their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion on young man or virgin, or the aged or the weak. He gave them all into his hand, and all the articles from the house of God, great and small, the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and of his leaders. All these he took to Babylon. Then they burned the house of God, broke down the wall of Jerusalem, burned all its palaces with fire, and destroyed all its precious possessions. And those who escaped from the sword he carried away to Babylon, where they become servants to him and his sons, until the rule of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. As long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. So this is a very clear passage, or as a summary of what exactly happened here. So the last, if you paid attention to the last line, um, by the until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths, as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath. So even though most often we say that it was the idolatry that led them into the Babylonian captivity, but also at the same time, it's the laws in general, especially in regards to the Sabbath, that the Israelites were not following. So what that means is, when the laws were given, God was very strict, very particular about following the Sabbath. So following the Sabbath does not is it's not just the seventh day that the God had given them laws about, but also about the seventh year. So what that means is, the Israelites, they could sow for 6 years, and on the seventh year they were supposed to rest. The whole year they were not supposed to sow at all. They were supposed to leave the land barren. So, and God knew that the Israelites or the Jews are not going to believe it. They are going to doubt. And so the God told them, if you ask me what we are going to do on the seventh year, God said, I am going to give you 3 times the crop on the sixth year. Okay, 3 times the crop on the sixth year. But in spite of that promise that God had given them, they never believed it. They never believed that, how it was possible. How could you get 3 times the crop on the sixth year? And what if, not what if we don't grow anything at all? So they never gave a chance like that, because of their doubt, because they never believed. They never followed this law never followed or observed this Sabbath for 490 years. They never observed the Sabbath for 490 years. And on what that means, so for 70 years they had done what they were not supposed to do. So what did God do? The Babylonian captivity lasted for 70 years. That's what we are reading here. As long as she desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. So that was the whole number about the 70 year of the Babylonian captivity. So coming back to the book of Daniel, I want to, even though we know the book of Daniel, the majority of the book of Daniel is prophetical. I do not want to touch any of the prophetical aspects of it. My what I this morning what I want to focus is only on the character of Daniel and his friends in the midst of the Gentile kings, in contrast to the nature or the character of the Gentile kings, how Daniel and his friends made a difference in the midst of the Gentile nation. So coming back to the book of Daniel, chapter. I only want to go through the few verses from the first 6 chapters, because after that we know it's about the vision about the future that God gives to Daniel. So to begin with, I want to emphasize 3 verses. We don't have to go through those 3 verses, but 3 times in the book of Daniel, God is calling Daniel his greatly beloved. When you see 3 verses, Daniel chapter 9 verse 23, Daniel chapter 10 and verse 11, and Daniel chapter 10 verse 19, these 3 verses, in different instances, you will see God calling Daniel, you are highly beloved. Oh Daniel, man greatly loved or greatly beloved. When we see God is calling Daniel like that 3 times, we know how special that is. And when we study the book of Daniel, and we study the life of Daniel, we will know why did God call him God's beloved, or what are the qualities in Daniel that we see that he got a testimony from God himself that Daniel was God's beloved. And for that reason, we know that God chose Daniel to reveal the visions of the future. Um, Chapter 1, as because we have already read previously about what led to the captivity, and so I'm not going to again going into that detail. But we read here that the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, and some of the articles of the house of God. And the first few chapters talks about um, how Daniel was brought into captivity. So uh, Nebuchadnezzar attacks Judah 3 times in three different times due to various reasons. And Daniel and his friends are being brought to captivity during the first time. When the first time, along with the houses of the articles of God. So these are happening in 3 different stages, and Daniel and his friends are being brought during the first time, along with the first group of people that are being brought to Babylon. So the first thing that the Daniel and his friends, or rather the first commandment that the Nebuchadnezzar is giving to them is that they are required to choose. We read about the qualities. There are certain qualities that they are required to pick young men with qualities like those who have no blemish, good looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge. So those who have these kind of qualities, the king is requiring that they pick these some of these people like this and train them, so that they will be able to help them in the king's court. So Daniel and his friends have these qualities, and so they are picked, and now they are required to go through a 3 years of traineeship. So during these 3 years, they are going to be trained in in the culture and the language and the literature of the Babylonians. So in a way, what we could say is, they are going to they are making these people to somehow integrate with the culture of the Babylonians. So the first thing that they do here is change the names of Daniel, and also the three friends that we are talking that's mentioned in the book of Daniel. First thing that they do is change their names. When we don't see Daniel having a problem here or issue here, or um, saying anything against it, that that he's not making any issues at that time. But the next thing that we see about is now they are going to change the diet plan of Daniel and his friends. But at this time, Daniel has a problem, and he is talking for himself and also for his friends. Now Daniel has a problem because now Daniel is being told that they are they are required to eat and drink whatever the king's diet. They Let's read the exact words the way so, and the king appointed for them a daily provision of king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank. So the diet is going to be changed, and the Daniel and his friends, and they are required to take the menu plan and the eat and drink what the king is drinking. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. Now Daniel has a problem. He 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 has purposed in his heart that he will not do it. Imagine, we have to remember the age of Daniel at this time. He is a teenager, okay, away from home, no one to question him, no one looking at, no one will know what he's what he's going to eat or drink, or as a matter of fact, no one will know what kind of a life that he is going to lead. But we see here, Daniel purposed in his heart that he will not eat or drink. Um, he will not eat or drink whatever they want to whatever the Daniel and his friends are required to eat. What is it, the lesson that we learn here in this situation? First lesson that we learn here is, unless someone let somebody defile themselves, the situation or their circumstances should never defile themselves. What that means is, if in today's circumstances, if we think about it, we may have lot of reasons or excuses that we hear about from individuals. When the kids, the children might say that, oh, okay, it's the peer pressure, that we are doing this. And same thing, those who work, we often say, okay, my job demands it. Those are the excuses that today's generation use it. But here we see, Daniel Daniel has purposed in his heart that he will not defile himself. And that's the quality of a child of God. That's the quality of a child of God. Unless we let ourselves defile, we should never be defiled. And Daniel and his friends, that is one of the first lesson that we learn from the life of Daniel, is how a child of God child of God protects themselves from defiling themselves. We know our um, we know this for a fact now from the life of Daniel. The second thing that so once Daniel has decided not to defile themselves, what's happening here. Now we see that God is interfering here. God, what do we read here? Now God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. So when Daniel decided that he is not going to defile himself, now God interferes. So this is what happens. First, we are supposed to do, or we have to take our own decisions. We have to decide what we want to do or we don't want to do. And when we do that, God makes circumstances favorable to us. Here, when Daniel resolved in his heart that he is not going to defile himself, God is giving him a favor with the chief of the eunuchs. And this is something very similar to what we see in the life of Joseph also. We see, let us read one verse from Genesis chapter 39, verse 21 and 23. Genesis 39, 21, 22, and 23. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So when Joseph decided that he was not going to defile himself, we know what happened. He landed up in prison, but that was not the end of it. That was not the end of it. The Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So when we try to honor God, when we try to live our lives in the way that bring honor and glory to God, God is definitely going to help us and make situations favorable in our lives. Sometimes, it may not be easy, but ultimately we know everything that's going to happen in our lives. God's word clearly says that if we honor him, he's going to honor us. So that's what here we see in the life of Daniel. Even though for a moment he decided that he is not going to defile himself, we have to remember, even when he is saying that he is not going to defile himself, on one side he is sacrificing all the goodness and the luxury that he could have enjoyed. He is not going to he is sacrificing all this goodness that was coming to him. At the same time, he may also anger the king at the same time. So it's a double risk that he is taking there by deciding not to defile himself. He is forsaking all the pleasure that was being granted to him. At the same time, he is saying no to king's orders. There are two things that could happen, but Daniel, he was purposed in his heart that he was not going to defile himself. And God is honoring him there. And God is giving him favor. And ultimately what happens, let's see towards the end of it, what's happening towards the end of it. So the first chapter end by let's see what was the consequence after the training period. What happened at the end of the training period? At the end of the days, when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. The king interviewed them, and among them all, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. There was none other. And in another verse, we know that they were 10 times better than those who went with the plan of the king, or those who went with the plan of going with the plan they were initially given. But God honored Daniel and his friends, and they were 10 times better. That's the last verse we see. He found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. So that's how we end chapter 1. Now, chapter 2 begins with a dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had. And I have to go very fast. I think I'm so the I'm not going to go through the dream. We all know what the dream was, but anyway, in short, uh, the king lost his sleep. Now he was we know who how mighty this king was at that time, unconquerable. There was nobody in those time that that could threaten him. But we see that he lost his sleep. He lost his sleep because of a dream. And so he is calling all the think tanks of those times. There are four groups that we read here that the king summons. He let's see. What verse is that? There are four group. So yes, verse 2. Okay. So there are four groups of people that he summons: the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans. So these four set of people, they are in different fields and in different specialities. And the king is summoning all of them. But the problem here is the king is not telling them what the dream was. Now, the scripture doesn't really say whether he forgot it or he's not saying it for some reason. So, some of the translation, it looks like, that he forgot the dream, but that was really not the case. He's not saying it for whatever reason. It's not told here. But uh, and all these four group of people, they are not going they could not help the king, because in their own words they are saying there is nobody in this world who can do this except the gods. They themselves are saying this. But then, and we know from when we read this passage, that Daniel is not even in this picture. Maybe because he is just out of probation and nobody even care what if Daniel is going to do this. And the decree goes that all the wise men are to be killed. So Arioch is the person who is given in charge, who is in charge of this. He is the one who is going to execute the king's agreement, king's orders. So Arioch comes to Daniel, and we see the conversation. So Arioch tells Daniel about what's happening, and Daniel comes to the king to ask for more time. And this is very interesting, because earlier that when these wise men are asking more questions, the king gets upset that you are just wasting time asking for more time. But when Daniel is coming to the king gives him more time. So we see God's interference. God is preparing the king during that time to give Daniel more time. So king grants Daniel more time. And what does Daniel do? He go back and discuss all these with his friends, and they pray. And one of the then that's where we see another character that we see about Daniel in that chapter. When after they pray, and God give them the dream, if you read about it, you will see another selfless character of Daniel. He says, thank you for giving us the dream. He's not taking all that credit for himself. Daniel says, thank you, Lord, that you have given us the dream. But even though the dream was given to Daniel, he's not taking that credit to himself. And more than that, another more interesting thing that happens there is he could have, the Daniel could have run to the king in excitement to get all the credit for the dream that, for the dream that, for the answer that he has for the king. But what does Daniel do here? Daniel is going back to Arioch, and the first thing that Daniel tells Arioch is very interesting to be noted. He tells Arioch, do not kill the wise men. That's the first thing that Daniel is telling them. Do not kill the wise men. There we see the selfless attitude of Daniel there. He could have easily not worried about the wise men. He had the answer to the king, and now he don't care whether others are killed. But Daniel is telling Arioch, do not kill the wise men. That was the first concern that Daniel had for that Daniel had. And that's something very, very noticeable. In Philippians chapter 2 and verse 4, Paul says, let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. And that's the character of, character of Daniel that we see. Let each of you, that's Philippians chapter 2 and verse 4, let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. We see a selfless um, attitude of Daniel there. Daniel is saying, do not kill the wise men. Then he is going to the king, um, and let me okay. One more very contrasting thing about there is the difference we see about Daniel and Arioch. Now, even though Daniel tells Arioch about all these, it's very interesting to notice what does Arioch come and tell the king. Okay, let's see what that verse is. Verse 5, verse 25. Okay. So Arioch, can somebody read that verse 20? Verse what? Okay, Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah. So this is what Arioch is telling. That's the difference between a child of God and a worldly person. A worldly person is always trying to promote himself. He wants to look good in front of others. Arioch is telling the king, I have found a man. But we don't see Daniel there, Daniel there correcting Arioch and saying, no, you know what, I think, I think that's not what happened. Daniel is not saying anything like that. Daniel is never worried about that. He goes on to explain to the king about the dream, and that chapter ends there. As I said before, I don't want to go into the prophetical part of it. So Daniel there explains about the image and the dream that the king had, and that chapter ends there. When we come to the chapter 3, we don't see anything about Daniel there. The chapter 3, it's it's about Nebuchadnezzar making a statue of himself. Now, even before, by the end of chapter 2, we know that after Daniel had explained the dream, and the king had a change in his heart, and he was glorifying God, saying that that there is only one God, and that's the living God, and that's the God of Daniel. But that was a very short-lived experience that the king had. And when we come to chapter 3, again we see the king making a statue of himself, and everyone are required to bow down there, and we see how Daniel friends, they are going through the fiery through the furnace and come back unharmed. And again, we see Nebuchadnezzar proclaiming that there is no other God other than the God of Daniel. So now there are two times that God had given Nebuchadnezzar the warning. Two times he should he has known in his life that there is no other God other than the living God, the God of Daniel. But that's not changing his heart. So when we come to chapter 4, we know that there's the second dream that the Nebuchadnezzar had, and that is the dream about the tree, a huge tree that he had a vision about, and that tree is chopped. And again, we see about the same thing happening, and Daniel is summoned here to explain what's happening. So here. Sorry, just give me 2 minutes. So, chapter 4, Daniel is explaining the dream. So just to summarize what was happening. So the dream is about a huge tree, and the dream itself explains how mighty and how powerful Nebuchadnezzar had grown. He was throughout the he was literally like protecting the whole world. That's the way he was dreaming. And Daniel explained to Nebuchadnezzar about what that dream means. So but we what we see here is now Daniel has a little some little soft corner for Nebuchadnezzar. Something we can say something like that, because Daniel is telling Nebuchadnezzar, this is what is going to happen. This is the dream, and the tree that you are dreaming about is you yourself. But you still have time. If you submit yourself, God may forgive you. So that's what Daniel is saying. So Daniel is saying that there is still time, even though that is the dream that you're seeing. If you it is the pride that is in you that's going to cost your life. But Daniel clearly tells the king, "O king, if you submit yourself, if you ask for forgiveness, God is going to forgive you." But we see that doesn't happen in the life. That doesn't happen. Daniel, just as he had dreamed, we know when Nebuchadnezzar was on the roof of his palace, and he see all these things that he has accomplished. We know pride coming into his heart. He's thinking that everything that he is seeing, he made it, even though that was not true. We know that even from the beginning, we see that it was God who was making Nebuchadnezzar do all this. It was God who gave them all the victory, and that is what the whole dream was about. But Nebuchadnezzar, when he saw all the glory of the glory of the kingdom, the pride came into his heart, and he's saying that he made it. And that's exactly what pride is all about. Every time, when we see certain things, and think about the accomplishment in our lives, and every time we think that it is because of our merit, or it's because of our hard work, that these accomplishments are coming into our life, that is pride. Whenever we forget that who is the source of all these, that's pride. And we see verses in the book of Proverbs how God hates pride. And we see in the life of Nebuchadnezzar what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. He was eating grass like an ox. But towards the end of it, there is one particular verse that I want to bring your attention to in this verse, in this chapter. And let me check. Okay, and that's verse 17. Why is Daniel right? And the way this chapter is written, it's as if as if Nebuchadnezzar is writing it. So when we read verse 17, chapter 4 and verse 17, was this particular chapter, or why was this being written? This decision is by the decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the Holy One, in order that the living may know. I think we should all underline that verse, that the living may know. This particular chapter, or maybe the whole script, all these are written so that the living may know, that we may know the consequences of pride in our lives. It's very, very, very important that we always keep this in our mind. This, it clearly says it was written that the living may know. It serves as a warning for each one of us, how God how God punishes pride in our life. Even though God calls Nebuchadnezzar his beloved in the book of Jeremiah, he did not tolerate the pride that came in the life of Nebuchadnezzar. But towards the end of this chapter, we see how Nebuchadnezzar submit himself. If we read the last verse, we read, what do we read in the last one? Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all of whose works are true and his way justice. And those who walk in pride, he is able to put down. That's how Nebuchadnezzar ends ends his life. He got a total conviction about how God is able to put down the pride. Nebuchadnezzar learned that a hard way. Even though he was warned, he did not listen to it until he had to go through that painful situation in his life. But finally, towards the end, even though he was warned thrice, towards the end, he learned a lesson. He is saying, and those who walk in pride, he is able to put it down. Even though I was planning to go through a few verses from chapter 5 and chapter 6, because of lack of time, I'm going to summarize it here. But just to summarize it, we know from the life of Daniel, Daniel lived through four kings. He served four kings in the midst of a Gentile nation, in the midst of a Gentile king. He served four kings. But when we come to chapter 6, and we read verse 3, we read, then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. Because an excellent spirit was in him. When we towards the same chapter, when we see how the king, even though the king let him to be in the lion's den, after when the king comes back to check on him, we could see, Daniel was not complaining, or he did not, he was, the way Daniel answers the king is something that, it's very surprising, or it's something that we should all pay attention to. When the king asked Daniel, oh Daniel, are you okay? And Daniel says, oh king, live forever. That's the attitude with which Daniel even answers the king, even at that time, even though the king let him into the lion's den. And that is possible only with somebody who has an excellent spirit. Three times God called him my beloved, my beloved, my beloved. And throughout this, the book of Daniel, even though there are only a few instances that I went through that shows the character of Daniel, how in the midst of a crooked generation, in the midst of the, even while serving the Gentile kings, he did not defile himself. He did not let jealousy rule in him. He lived a selfless life, trying to think about the good of the others, and always doing everything everything to benefit others, and looking good for others, and talking to everyone in a pleasant and humble way. May these words help us in the coming days, that we may be able to submit ourselves, we may be able to live a life, we may be able to live a humble life, and and live a life of gratitude, thanking him for all the blessings that God is giving us to enjoy in our lives. May these words help